first maybe introduce the promoter, which is Professor Anne van Griensven. And we have his co-promoter. This is Nora van Kouwenberg. Then we have the external examiners from Belgium, Katholieke Universiteit Leuven. We have Professor Mark Krabs. And we have from Bolivia, as external examiner, Professor Paul Dpsir from Universidad Católica Boliviana, São Paulo. Then we have our internal jury member, and that is Mathieu Kervin de Merender. He's from the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. Then jury member and secretary, Professor Marijke Huismans. And we have as vice chair, also from the Vrije Universiteit Brussel, Professor De Grave Iris. And then myself, I'm Abdellah Touafi. I'm the chairman today. So I got the honor to be the chairman today. So you have about 40 minutes to explain your work to the larger public. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Afnán Agramont. I'm presenting my doctoral research today. The title is The Human Face of Water, Understanding the Socio-Ecological Complexity in the Integrated Water Resources Management Paradigm. As it was mentioned, my promoters are Dr. Anne van Griensven and Dr. Nora van Kouwenberg. So to start this presentation, I would like to share a quote. While we were interviewing stakeholders in the framework of this research, making the data collection, we went to one of the communities that it's impacted by the contamination in the case study I'm about to show. When we asked them, and we asked this person what he considered were the problems and challenges in relation to his community and the river basin in general, he said the following: I believe that we should start from the sense of community, considering that community is not only a human community, but the community is also made up of all the elements of nature, be they stars, animals, plants, the air we breathe, the sun, the coexistence that we have every day. That is the true community. So the structure of the presentation I will make today, I will first start with an introduction. We will see what is IWRM and some of the challenges behind. Then we will talk about planning. The second chapter of this thesis is about planning under the IWRM. Then we will discuss the transdisciplinary learning communities approach. In the fourth chapter, framing water policies within IWRM. And finally, I will present the conclusions. So yeah, this thesis is about integrated water resources management. And by definition, IWRM is a process which promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources in order to maximize the resultant economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising the sustainability of vital ecosystems. So basically, we're talking about coordination, participation. We're talking about sustainability in terms of economy, environment, and society. And we tend to use IWRM as a buzzword. Many times we use it like integrated management, integrated water resources management for everything. However, IWRM has very specific features. On one hand, the boundary in which we implement IWRM is the river basin. And it's the river basin because surface water not just connect, the river basin not just connect the surface water, but it connects the economic, the cultural, and the political systems within this boundary. The second feature is related to public participation. It's recalled, and it's important, it's considered important that all the stakeholders involved and within this boundary participate of the decision-making processes and water policy developments. For what? In order to manage the water resources. IWRM is considered the best water management approach, and it's part of the SDG agenda. At the moment is the indicator 6.5.1 is measuring the degree of the implementation of IWRM. However, if we look for articles referring to the challenges behind the implementation of IWRM, there are quite a big number of research referring to challenges in terms of the implementation. Within this research, we argue that one of the main challenges is based on the limited understanding of the social and environmental relations within river basins. Consequently, the main objective of this research is to contribute to a better understanding of the social and environmental relations within planning and decision-making in the IWRM paradigm. The research questions of this study are: how can the socio-ecological driver impact relations be better understood and be part of a shared vision within a multi-stakeholder setting in river basin management? And how can we integrate the diverse forms of knowledge, disciplines, and backgrounds in a society, policy, and science interface? How can they improve decision-making and policy developments? The case study is the Catari River Basin. The Catari River Basin is in South America, in the country of Bolivia. It's the largest populated river basin in Bolivia. And it's important because this river basin discharges over the Titicaca Lake, which is the highest navigable lake in the world. It's the largest freshwater lake in South America, and is the most important water resource in the Andes region. However, different anthropogenic developments within this river basin turn the Catari River Basin to be the major source of contamination towards the Titicaca Lake. And these not just brought environmental impacts, but these also reproduce important social conflicts within the context. So the first article related to this thesis is discussing IWRM and planning, and we will discuss the DPSIR framework. The DPSIR framework is a framework initially developed by the OECD countries during the 90s. Later, the European Environmental Agency also adopted this framework, and the Water Framework Directive also incorporated this framework in order to do planning within IWRM. And what is this framework? This framework incorporates 5 elements in which it's considered that the driving forces exert certain pressures over the environment. This modifies its state and reproduce certain environmental impacts. In order to manage these situations, there are different societal responses, and many times these hold the form of a policy. So this is an example at the European Union level. There was an increase in agriculture. In order, since it was more agriculture, there was more use of fertilizers. The fertilizers turned to be a source of diffuse pollution and cause an environmental impact in the surface waters. So in order to manage this, the European Commission enacted a policy, a Nitrates Directive, in order to control and regulate the use of fertilizers. So going to the case study, we implemented this research. There is an important event on 2015 from which 2 tons of dead fish, frogs, and birds were found in the discharge area of this river basin. Also, the discharge area of this river basin every year has to deal with all the solid waste that it's delivered from upstream. And recently it's documented that there are around 80 square kilometers of highly contaminated waters by organic pollution at the discharge area of this river basin. When we apply the framework, trying to understand what is happening in this case study, we can see that there is a presence of mining in the highest part of the river basin. We have urban and industrial developments, And we have the presence of livestock farming and agriculture. At the highest part of the river basin, it is possible to see the presence of 2 million cubic meters of mine waste. This reproduces a constant acid mine drainage, which is actually influencing and is discharged over the second largest dam in the region, which is supplying water to the cities of El Alto and La Paz. In the second region, we can see that the environmental pressure is different. We can identify 20 million cubic meters of untreated or ineffectively treated that are discharged over the rivers crossing the cities of El Alto and Biacha. There were over 4,000 industrial activities which are also contributing to the problem of contamination. And also these cities discharge around 800 tons per year of urban and industrial solid waste over these rivers. And in the third region of the study, we can see the presence of livestock and agriculture, which also contributes with organic pollution. So we tried to went a little bit far from a little bit beyond from the framework, and we tried to understand what are the social impacts linked to these environmental modifications. We've been able to see that the communities in the downstream area have to deal with the problem of solid waste. They are in contact with this on a daily basis. The drinking water sources are subject to a high vulnerability. And another issue is that discharge areas of river basins tend to be very rich in fish population. However, this is not the case in the Qatari River Basin. Because of the high level of contamination, they have to change their livelihoods. They used to be fisheries, and they shifted to be to start to raise cattle, produce dairy products. These communities are aware of the contamination within their products, so they usually change the origin of these products in order to sell them in the local markets. When we assess the policy responses implemented from the period 2004 to 2019 in this river basin, we've been able to identify that majority of policy responses were implemented in the discharge area of the river basin, in the lake. Just a small number of policy responses were directed to the sources of the contamination, the environmental pressures. And this makes us question the sustainability in terms of policy responses, because no matter how much efforts we do in the discharge area of the river basin, if we don't understand the driver impact relations within the system, we will not develop policies that will actually make a change. This is a Ministry Water and Environment cleaning campaign of October 2021, and they mobilize different volunteers and public sector to go and clean the Titicaca lake shores and the discharge area of the river basin. But one more time, no matter how much efforts we do in this area, if we don't understand the driver impact relations within the system, the policies will just not have a sustainable effect. We also assess the different scales at which these policies were developed and implemented. And we can see that majority of policy responses have been developed and implemented at the highest levels of government. There is a very limited local participation. And we consider that local participation is definitely important because they represent a resource, and they can also be and contribute to the sustainability of the implementation of the policies. When we assess the spatial scale from where these policy responses were implemented, we found a very interesting results. We found that in 2004, there is a policy which declares the Qatari River Basin an environmental disaster zone and hydrological emergency. And we can see that the spatial scale within the policy, it actually holds a link with the river basin. The policy 2010 increased the number of municipalities and jurisdictions involved. And the audit 2014 also show a link between these municipalities, the jurisdictions, and the river basin. However, the policy 2018 now increase the number of stakeholders and jurisdiction. The spatial scale of the policy now involves 24 municipalities. This is breaking the principle of IWRM, because IWRM is supposed to be this connection, this interrelation within the boundaries of a hydrological system. But within this new policy, we can see that this is not present. In the next chapter, we discuss the transdisciplinary learning communities to support the implementation of IWRM. With IWRM, recalling the need to participation of different stakeholders, we can see that there is a shift in the governance system. In the past, it was the government having control of the decision-making and implementation of policies. But within this new paradigm, it's important the participation and the shared management of water. So within this chapter, we propose the transdisciplinary approach as a way to involve the different stakeholders and different disciplines in the decision-making processes. And we consider, and to have this clear, transdisciplinary not just recognize scientific knowledge, but it also takes into consideration non-scientific stakeholders and communities, which can contribute to the process of research. And they can also be part of this process of developing knowledge and decision-making. Many times, these systems within IWRM hold the form of a river basin committee, where they where the different stakeholders develop water policies. And yeah, it's based on the interaction of all these disciplines and backgrounds. So within this chapter, we propose the transdisciplinary learning communities as a form to integrate the different disciplines, the different forms of knowledge, and the different social actors in a joint knowledge production process. And we consider that this process can be very beneficial in order to integrate not just formal stakeholders, but involve and take into consideration the most vulnerable social groups in the decision-making process in order to consider their needs, their values, and their interests in the process of IWRM implementation. We had planned this at the beginning, but while we were writing this chapter, the Ministry of Water and Environment decided to enact a new policy, the policy 2018-2030. And the ministry developed a river basin committee. So we were thinking like, okay, maybe it will be smarter to join them. And we were actually formally invited to be part of the committee. And our design of TLC hold a very important similarities with the river basin committee. They were inviting universities, international cooperation agencies, local community representation. So at the end, yeah, the strategy had to change. And we decided to study the structure and the functioning of this river basin committee, but we decided to start with the framing, understanding the framing of this system. In order to develop a water policy, there are two more important moments. First, we have to try to make sense of the situation we're dealing with. And this is a retrospective process in which we try to understand what is happening. For instance, as you can see in this slide, we can see a picture of two kids. And one of the ways to frame this situation can be a fight. On the other hand, another stakeholder, another person can see this picture as a game. In a second moment of a policy development, it's about enacting decision. It's about the future. So if we, in this moment, decide what are we going to do about this situation, probably the person that saw this situation as a fight will consider that we should stop this situation these two kids are fighting. But the person who saw this as a game will probably think, okay, they can continue. This is why framing is so important in a policy development. And can you imagine what it happens in such a diverse system as a river basin committee, where we have all these backgrounds, disciplines, and ways to make sense of the problem happening? So often it looks like everybody's talking about the same thing, while they frame that same thing in very divergent ways. We applied this to the Qatari River Basin. We made interviews to try to understand how the different stakeholders frame the problems within the river basin. And the good news is that majority of stakeholders frame the situation within the same domain. It's mainly about contamination. However, if you can see what a community representative thinks that is the problem, he's talking about wastewater discharges. If we ask the regional government representative, he's referring to the frame of the problem in terms of mining, industry, and solid waste. And if we ask the international cooperation representative, he framed the problem in terms of the use of antibiotics, sewage infrastructure, and water legislation. So you can see that this is actually quite fragmented in terms of how they are framing the problem. And why is this an issue? Is that policy developments holding this level of uncertainty and ambiguity can turn this into a minefield. Many times these policies are full of big words and no choice. So we tried to understand what was happening in this system. And we were trying to understand why there is this fragmentation present within the Qatari River Basin Committee. We realized that the participatory design, by design, it's fragmenting the system. The ministry is clustering different groups of stakeholders holding similar frames. For instance, the board of directors is just a forum where just public authority participates. The mayors, the government representatives, and ministry representatives are sitting in this round table. Then they have another different meeting where they sit all the community-based representatives. And they have another meeting where they sit the NGOs, the research centers, and the international cooperation agencies. There's no room for interaction among them. And this is contributing to the fragmentation of frames within this system. We are part, at the UCB, we are part of the third group, the technical council. However, we managed to infiltrate ourselves in the other meetings so we can make observations and also collect data through the process of this research. And something that we also realized during the observations and interviews is that this design is also contributing to the water conflicts. When we were talking with the community representatives, they complain about public authority not having results. And they even said that they are ignoring us. So we might have to find other ways to put pressure over them. On the other hand, while we were participating of the meetings of the ministry representatives, just the public authority, they were complaining about the communities because they say that they want to implement the river basin plan, but there are the communities who are not allowing them to implement the projects within their communities, within their jurisdictions. So yeah, it's another funny. And we realized that this structure, this system, and this way to cluster the different stakeholders is based on the river basin policy enacted by the ministry when they were starting this implementation. The river basin policy is leading to this participatory design, and this is the one contributing to the framing, to the fragmentation of frames in this case. As I mentioned previously, another important challenge here is the fact that the spatial scale of the project and the new policy, it's involving stakeholders out of the river basin scale. At these local scales, also stakeholders, people participating have different frames, different problem frames, and they are coming from different realities. So this makes it more complex and difficult. And another element related is the fact that the political context is also influencing to the problem in this system. The municipality of El Alto, where majority of the driving forces are taking place, have a different political party, has been under the administration of a different political party for the past 10 years. And the national government, it managed to informally limit the participation of this municipality. This is a key stakeholder to find a solution in this case study. And they should be actively involved in order to solve the problem of contamination. In terms of the conclusions, we can conclude that the limited understanding of social and environmental relations within this case study show us that 14 years of ineffective and unsustainable water resources policies. The spatial and scalar analysis within the DPSIR can help us have a better understanding of driver impact relations. And this also allows us to recognize other levels and key stakeholders to involve them in the participatory processes. We conclude that through the TLC, it's maybe possible to involve local levels and to integrate the different disciplines, cultures, and values and backgrounds of stakeholders involved. At the same time, this approach can allow us to involve excluded social groups to be empowered and actively involved in the IWRM implementation. This research also confirms the need to integrate the different ways in which stakeholders make sense of the water problems, which is not happening in our case study. And that the installation of frames restricts collective knowledge construction. And we also see a strong link between the participatory design and the framing processes. I will finish this presentation with a picture of the vice president of the country. His name is David Choquehuanca. He was participating of the cleaning campaign of the ministry the last year. But one more time, if we don't have an understanding of the social and environmental relations within river basins, our policies will not have a sustainable effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very instructive presentation. Okay, so we will give first the jury the possibility to ask some questions to go into discussion with the candidate, and then the public will get also the opportunity to ask some questions. Normally, we also start with the persons that come from the furthest, so we will start from Bolivia in this case. Let's start with Professor Paul Dabzak from Universidad Católica Boliviana San Pablo.
Do you want the microphone?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Afnan, for this clear presentation. And thank you for taking into account our observation in the private defense within your thesis. I just have one question. You present a lot of challenges in Bolivia. Communication issues, fragmentation within the committees and so on. So regarding your results, your work, your knowledge, what is the role of the university right now to improve the integrated water management in the river basin?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I would say that it's very linked to the research and the knowledge we are contributing to through these projects. For instance, we had the chance to present the results of this research in an event which involved the Ministry of Water and Environment on September last year, August last year. And in a public event, we delivered the products. We discussed these with them, and I think our contribution is related to the information and knowledge we are getting through these processes. Yeah.
And do you think what kind of strategies we have to implement to have a better communication with these authorities?
Definitely, I mean, the fact that we have a river basin committee, for instance, in the case of the Qatar River Basin, it's already a positive thing. We are starting with some, but we need to have these insights within the operations and the actual processes with the authorities. I think it's important to get a better dialogue through these spaces in which actually we can contribute with these outcomes in order to improve the operations and the functioning and finally the policy outcomes that they will manage the water resources.
Okay, thank you.
Professor Mark Krabs.
Okay, good afternoon, Afnán. First of all, I'd like to sincerely congratulate you for arriving at this moment here and for the work you are presenting. From the start of your study, you realized that complex water management problems means in the first place studying the relation between the social actors that manage water issues. And for that purpose, you were not afraid to venture into the human and the social sciences for your PhD, which was, given your engineering background, not an easy challenge. So it was for me also a pleasure to accompany you in this journey, which has resulted in various even joint publications in a deep friendship. However, today I'm sitting here as part of the jury, and as I understand, it's the duty of the jury to come up with critical questions to evaluate your academic strength. So please be prepared, because I still have some critical remarks. Okay, so my first question is referring to one of the conclusions of your second chapter on the Dpsir framework, where you write, and you will immediately recognize that the limited local participation in the policy design and implementation can be linked to a lack of understanding of the Qatari River Basin as a multi-scale system. That's one of your core conclusions. But do you really believe that it is a lack of understanding of the multiple scales that causes the limited participation of the local communities downstream at the shores of the Lake Titicaca and of the municipality of El Alto and Viacha? Or is it not also, or even more, a question of interests and political power plays between the different actors that are situated upstream and downstream? Because as you know even better as I do, indeed, the more upstream actors that, the more you are upstream, you more you have the benefits, and that you can pass on the burdens to those downstream. So that means also, do they really want to be informed about the results of your study? Are those results really surprising for them, or did they know it, or did they realize it already? And as a consequence, also my question is if, how your study can or will influence those power plays that affect the river basin governance.
Thank you for the question. I think that, let's see, one of the, I think it's possible that there are some intentions behind how this it's been implemented. By principle, in the design, they are recalling for a participation. They are actually opening a space for people to participate and actually be part of the decision-making processes. However, the way it's being implemented is I think is the main challenge behind. I cannot really answer that. I don't have data to confirm that there are actually political interests behind. However, I can say that it's evident that there are power asymmetries in place that should be better understood.
With your study, you demonstrate and you ground it with facts and figures what happens upstream, first at the Miluni Dam and then in Alto Aviace, how this affects. But in fact, I can just imagine that this, in general terms, it is known. It's so clear. It's so evident. So will this study, by providing more facts and figures, will that in itself change then the policy?
I can say that it can definitely contribute to the discussion, because we can see that we have very important outcomes in terms of showing that policy implementation is not very sustainable and it can be reframed. Now we try to do our best to deliver this information. We've been participating of the committee where we are invited, and we also deliver these results to the ministers. I cannot confirm that they will use them, but at least they are out, and it's a discussion that people can now present in the table. Yeah.
Okay, I have still another question, which is somewhat related to the former one, because in your final chapter, you arrive at the conclusion that the River Basin Committee, which is developed by the Ministry of Water and Environment, has significant similarities with the transdisciplinary learning communities. That's what you said also in your presentation, which is proposed by the IUC program at the UCB. And that's also why you decided then to be part of that committee. Now, I do not doubt of the usefulness to, as you say, also to, how did you call it? To enter into the committee in a hidden way, even a little bit. But yeah, infiltrate, you said. Yeah. But I doubt that the Qatari River Basin is really a transdisciplinary learning community, and even that it can or that it should be a transdisciplinary learning community, because the River Basin Committee, it's a formal decision-making body, whereas it's to implement and to follow up policies, whereas TLCs, yeah, as we conceived them or implemented them, they are rather informal spaces for actors to meet, to exchange information and worries, to jointly make sense also of a shared reality by connecting and integrating different views on that reality. Of course, the ones, the committees and the learning communities, they are related because, yeah, if we can better and in a more integrated way understand reality, maybe we can arrive also at better policies. But my question is then, how would we conceive an optimal relation between learning communities on the one hand and the policymakers in the River Basin Committee on the other hand?
I think like the way we conceived this proposal and idea of the TLCs, it was also relating to public and decision makers within these spaces. Yeah, I agree that they were thought to be informal spaces and to do research and produce knowledge that can be exported or actionable knowledge that it can be used. But I personally believe that if we wouldn't take into consideration the River Basin Committee, we will be just, I mean, it wasn't a smart strategy to do, because then they are the stakeholders actually getting these outcomes that it will turn into policies. and they are managing the main policies within the river basin. We can have an informal meeting, an informal space within our our own TLC, but I think it was way more interesting and useful to use the river basin committee. They might not be exactly a TLC, but the analysis of this space can certainly contribute to policy developments and changes in the river basin.
It not be useful then to think about more informal spaces where you can bring actors that belong to different sectors together, yeah, in other circumstances, because now it's all very formal, and as you presented also, very separated and very hierarchical, even because, yeah, there are decisions about policies, etc. in play. So that's not the best context to really learn and exchange and be open, and trusting towards each other.
I think like there are two things to consider. One thing, it will be the process, the methodology behind, but something else is like, for us, we are studying how it's functioning, and it's something that it's already there, and it's actually, it has a budget, it's implementing policies, it's doing stuff to try to solve the situation. So I personally believe that it will be, at this point, at least for us, it will be better to study the functioning of this system in order to produce some outcomes that they can maybe employ to change their methodologies, their processes, in order to make it more like, let's say, like a TLC, to take into consideration more the local levels and the stakeholders which are there, but they are not really participating.
Okay, thanks. It's an issue, I think, about which we should continue thinking. I have one last question, if I'm allowed. Yeah. So we started 5 years ago also at the UCB, at the university there, the IUC program with the Transdisciplinary Learning Approach, which was in itself also a learning experience. And I was one of the leaders of that transversal project in this program then, promoting that approach. So I'm especially interested to hear from you, which are, according to your personal experience, also important insights for the university concerning those TLCs. Because in your thesis, with good reason, you focus on the learning insights from the perspectives of the Qatari River Basin, yeah, about which we talked in my former question. But I would also like to hear your insights and recommendations for the universities. Are they, according to you, a valuable approach to contribute to the sustainable development of complex systems and the well-being of vulnerable communities? And if so, how should they be further developed now that we enter the second phase of the program? And also maybe what can we at the Flemish universities learn from your experiences in Bolivia about them?
Yeah, something that I can say that is that at the beginning we put so much effort trying to structure the TLC as something with rules and trying to define what it is. After 4 years of implementing the project, I learned by firsthand that the TLCs are not something that you can purely design, but you construct. And through the process of being and develop a relationship with your colleagues, with people interested in the same topics, then we have constructed something. We can see that, at least in the case of our TLC in La Paz, that these developed through a process of construction, of friendship, of engagement, in which by the end it started to function because of it. But we spend a valuable time trying to define it, trying to structure it, trying to make very formal agreements in terms of what we are going to do, which it didn't work. So yeah, I think that will be for me the most important lessons. That TLCs, it's something that you construct. It's not something that you can design and bring it to the table like so well structured. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this nice discussion. Professor De Merender.
Yes, thank you, Afnan. I want to congratulate you for the presentation, which was extremely clear and very well illustrated. I enjoyed reading your thesis and also the discussion we had during the private defense. I still have a few questions, and I will continue on this concept of TLC because you're really enthusiastic about it in chapter 3, and then you later on explain, okay, that you change a little bit the focus of the research. But I'd like to know how would you have it implemented it if you would have continued on that track? How would that look like a TLC? Who would be there? You say that the goal would be to jointly produce knowledge and do research together, to have equal voice and give more voice to more marginalized group. How do you reach that in comparisons to these committees that exist and that may group the same type of people, but where you see that there are issue of different frames and an equal power relationship, which means that maybe people are provided with information, but not really sharing information. So what tools or how would you set up your TLC to actually have this more equal distribution of voice power and co-produce knowledge?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The idea on the design, it was to have an space in which we can have this interaction with local stakeholders. And actually the initial idea, it was to have to do these joint research with them, like to go to the communities and actually ask them what it will be for them, the purpose of what they will be interested to research. That is another thing, like we learned through this process. We were thinking that at some point we can ask local communities what they want to research, and we will just like join them or be there or try to make it happen. But the reality through this process is that we can see that this is also an agreement between everybody, because if we as a researchers don't have the interest to be involved also in these topics, it's just not going to work. But yeah, the idea was to continue going to the communities in a transdisciplinary approach, in which we have participants of all the different thematic projects within the program. So we will have like psychologists, we will have lawyers, we will have engineers in this space to discuss what we would like to research in terms of these contexts, and to continue to implement it in that way, involving local communities so they can be part of the process.
Okay, and when you say local communities, do you consider that there you would not have this issue of an equal power distribution, or and that relates to your concept saying TLC give a voice to the most socially vulnerable group? I'd like to have your definitions, or how would you say, oh, you need to be on board because you are vulnerable? What criteria do you use, and will it be the same if you look at water or if you look at food production or other aspects?
Yeah, I think it's, in my personal opinion, I think like it will be, we will assume, we even like within the interdisciplinary group within the university, we have power asymmetries already. So to go to, we will have to explore methodologies to avoid these kind of asymmetries, but they might be present, and we have to manage in order to reduce them. But yeah, it may be present. It's actually what it happens in our interdisciplinary group within the university. We still have these power asymmetries. Yeah.
Okay, and then maybe just to understand, you mentioned several times that when the governments decide on interventions, then they are being opposed by the local communities. Like you mentioned, I think a wastewater treatment plan in the city. What are the arguments of the local people to oppose these actions?
For instance, the municipality, when they decide to invest in the project, they decided to, we're having this wastewater treatment plant. We made the plans, we made the blueprints, but the best location is here. But that location is within the jurisdiction of a rural indigenous community. So they have autonomy, they have the power to decide what is happening there or not. So when they want to implement it, they want to actually build it, the communities are there telling them, like, you didn't ask. We are afraid that this will also influence our quality of life. You're bringing the waste of the city, so, or the waste of the main urban area. So
okay,
that's yeah.
They don't see a direct benefit for themselves, and so
they don't. It's actually it's also documented that they many of these projects were already decided. They already had even funding, and when they were going there and starting infrastructure, the local communities were like, you didn't ask. It's our land. And we are afraid that this will turn, they compare it to another wastewater treatment plant that there is in El Alto, which is causing also a lot of trouble. So they consider that it will impact their ecosystem and their quality of life. Yeah.
Okay, so that relates probably to your different scale of analysis, where people look at their own direct environment and not at the big scale picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I think this issue of TLC is very interesting, but I'd like to see it in practice to see how this co-generation of knowledge, how do you implement that. But thank you for the research.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Professor Marijke Huismans.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations, Afnán. Very nice presentation today. Very clear, very interesting. I would like to continue the discussion on similar topics as the previous jury members have addressed. The TLC, you try to keep it short in the presentation, but you see, we will not keep it short in the discussion. So first question, initially 5 years ago, there was a design of how an ideal TLC should look like, we just discussed. And then at some point, you took a bit the pragmatic decision to join this river basin committee instead of the TLC. So what do you think are the main, let's say, differences between the original ideal design of a TLC and then the reality of this river basin committee?
Let's see. I think like one of the first challenges with the TLC as it was proposed is that it came with a design. It came with some ideas that not everybody within this group shared. It was very challenging to be part of something you did not decide on. So then we were trying to, and that's the discussion on power asymmetry. We were discussing who worked with who and what are we going to do now. So that was one of the things, like, certainly influenced the implementation. I think like something that it would be very nice to have is to have the space to decide together on what to do, on how to approach the TLC, because then we have thematic projects already designed, and then you have to, everybody was pulling the rope towards their project. So it was very challenging. I think I pulled my rope as well, bringing the people to the river basin committee. And yeah, I mean, we have some people who were interested and participated of this group. So that's one of the things. We can see the similarities in terms of that. There is a very diverse group of people that in theory is supposed to discuss and decide on what to do in order to solve a problem in the river basin committee. But as I mentioned, it's not actually that the case. What's happening is that public authority is using the space to show results, to show what they do, and try to I would say to show what they're doing in terms of the of the policy implementation, but it's not a real space for participation and discussion. So yeah.
And what would you see as the most important or best outcome so far from this River Basin Committee? Is there a particular decision or policy or outcome that you would say this is the best they have achieved so far?
I think that the fact that the River Basin exists, like the River Basin Committee exists, is already something positive in terms of, okay, we are trying to unite all these people in order to try to enact decision making and put that in policies. But I cannot see much from it so far.
Yeah, but okay, it's difficult to bring people together and to have people talking and listening, but it's much more difficult to actually implement the environmental policies that are necessary to solve the problem. And the problem is huge, the pollution is huge. And if you think of what is necessary to solve the problem, it will be major, very strict environmental regulations that will affect a lot of sectors. There will be a lot of opposition, that there will be a lot of investments necessary, and that money cannot go to other sources. So it is a very difficult problem to solve. And it's easy to bring people together, but as soon as you really have to take such decisions that will also have a lot of people opposing and will have huge impacts in different sectors, that will of course be the test whether your committee will still manage to come to a solution and still agree, or whether at that point when real decisions have to be made, whether they will actually survive it as a structure. So how would you evaluate that?
I totally agree, but and it's one of the outcomes of this research. The structure of the participatory design it has important gaps, because certainly if you increase the number of stakeholders coming one more time without this interconnection and without a clear problem and within this boundary, we will have different stakeholders looking for different stuff. And then we increase the level of ambiguity, and then we don't have an actual process of decision making in which we can agree on one thing, on what it's the issue that it's actually interconnecting us. So then from the start of the design, it's increasing these problems. So I think like it will be smarter to redesign it and try to involve just stakeholders who actually are within this relation.
Yeah. Do you think you are a realist or an idealist? Because of course, yeah, all these politics and power relations, is that something you can solve? People are not innocent. Read the newspaper. People are not always prioritizing the greater good. So do you actually believe that this can work, that with this structure, you can actually solve such a huge problem with so many?
It wouldn't be just that factor. It will be dependent on others as well. But I think it will be important to have clarity in terms of who should sit in these discussions. Otherwise, it's just a mess.
And how do you evaluate the role of scientists, you, but also others in this committee? Because when you enter as a scientist in such a committee, there is a risk that they use you, that you give 10 advices and they just cherry pick the 2 they like, and then they discard all the rest, and they say, look, we listened to the scientists because we did this and this, what they advised. Believe me, this is how things work. So there is always this, do you really have the feeling that they listen, or do you sometimes get the feeling that they use you a bit to say, look, we listened to the scientists and then we did what they said?
At least I can say that I haven't seen that they actually reflect that they use part of our outcomes in their processes they are implemented. They never show us that, not yet, at least. I don't think like, I don't feel used like when we are participating here. But yeah, I mean, what I can see one more time is that in terms of the design of the system, they are not connecting with the scientists in this committee. The scientists are in one round table talking among scientists. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, majority are more doing water quality research. People get super excited. We should make more samples about this and this, but what are we doing with this data? How is it actually being used by the people who decide? So one more time, I think the design is not contributing to this discussion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Afnán.
Thank you for this very interesting discussion. Professor Iris de Graaf.
Thank you. Thank you, Afnán, for a very interesting overview. And like in the private defense, I will repeat myself. I'm not an expert in this topic, so I look at it from a bit a different way, maybe a bit an innocent way, I don't know. I have two questions. My first question starts with a couple of statements, and I would like your opinion on them, and then a related question. So in my head, I have like two logical statements. To become a member of the Ministry of Water and Environment Management or a policymaker of any kind, you need to be educated. That's my first statement. And then you talk about vulnerable local communities. Now, I would think to make vulnerable communities less vulnerable, maybe education can play a role. So my question is, are there really also plans to educate the local communities and not just give them little scraps of information, but really educate them in the topic so they can become the engineers like you are and try to be a policymaker? Is there education programs to help these local communities really give them a voice?
I will say that what is currently happening in these communities is that majority tend to migrate in order to access, formal education. However, I don't think that it will be a limitant in terms of actually involvement in the decision-making processes. I believe that beyond the fact that there is not formal education with many of these stakeholders, there is very important local knowledge we can be actually can contribute to the process. And just the fact to understand how is a person dealing with the problem of contamination in daily basis in a discussion in a roundtable, I think it's an important contribution to understanding what is happening there and how we drive our decisions. Okay, now I hear again an idealist maybe speaking and not a realist. I think the ones, okay. I think maybe too. It's nice to have idealists in the world. It's really nice. But then another question, again, from another perspective, can the international community somehow help? Because like the World Health Organization must acknowledge that this is a really serious health problem for a lot of local communities. So can the international community help and put some pressure
that this progresses a bit faster. Pressure is a bad word, but help, and yeah, somehow, like Mareike was saying, maybe they just pick 1 or 2 suggestions and they say, oh, we listen to the scientists, but maybe somebody could say, no, you need to put all those suggestions in the practice. Can the international community help?
What we've been able to see, and we actually have data about it, is that the international cooperation is very limited to decide and to be part of the decision-making processes within the policy implementation. They make it very clear that they can accept funding, but the decisions are made by the ministry. And of course, this is something that is influencing all the process, because we have the data now. We know what is happening there. We know where to make the investments. And just to give you a number, in this first phase of implementation of this river basin plan, they had a budget of $85 million, which is not little to try to make actually structural changes to the problem. So I don't think like the money was an issue, but the way we are deciding and implementing the policies is definitely not very effective.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, then we can go to the promoters. Let's maybe first start with the co-promoter.
Microphone.
Yes, thank you, Afnán, for a beautiful and very interesting presentation. And of course, congratulations. It's a very big day. You really did a great work. And I mean, we go back from times of Delft, and it was really a pleasure to see at the start of this PhD that an old student of Delft times was starting this endeavor, and we could work again together. And it has been quite an adventure. Also, I really admire that you chose this particular topic, because as you showed already, 4 million articles have been published on the challenges of IWRM. And so you still had to add to that, and you did, yeah? And that's a big achievement. And I think one of the interesting findings is about these multiple scales, right? And the importance that they have. And you talk about geographical scales and governance skills, but also the mental skills or the knowledge, the frames that people have. And there is something that kind of, I wonder, or I would like to ask you to reflect on it for the future research. In this particular river basin, where you have this large lake at the outlet, right? And whatever happens to that lake also affects communities that are not part of this hydrological boundary. Yeah. To what extent do you think that including a larger boundary is really a problem, or could it also somehow be an incentive to drive, a solution for this huge environmental problem?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that it depends on where the scale where we're going. As we can see in these, in the policy, how it's been enlarged, the spatial scale in terms of municipalities and jurisdictions. Many of these do not necessarily share that problem. However, I will certainly think like it will be positive, and it will be even strategic to involve communities who lives from the fish population in the area, who actually have that connection with the lake. So yeah, to enlarge it in a way that they're actual communities linked to the situation and the environmental challenge there, it will be something positive.
Okay, thank you. And the other question or reflection I had, I really liked the start of your presentation, with the quote of this local person. And I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you think he's a reflection of a broader thinking, yeah, of what a community is? And if so, is there something in future research and, for example, citizen science that could help bring this kind of understanding of what community is and a more holistic approach, the values of environmental health to the policymakers? Do you have a research idea that you could say, okay, this is what we have to do?
I didn't really think about it, but in the future, I'm continuing with this approach and to get involved all these stakeholders to have a more insightful policies, more meaningful policies. I think it will be smart. It will be something positive to have. And it's one more time. I know I sound like idealist, but for me, it's these people with this understanding can contribute a lot in the process. We don't understand this reality and this way of thinking, and having this in these discussions can, for me at least, certainly contribute.
Okay, then we give the word to the promoter.
Okay, so we are approaching the end, and I first of all also want to congratulate you for the presentation and the discussions we had today and all the work you have been achieving. I also have maybe a last question, and this also relates to the fact that you studied water management in Delft, and I think you have seen many examples and cases. So my question is, to what extent is what you're discussing on the Qatari, is it unique for the Qatari, or is it a typical problem?
I think that one important thing that at least that it's actually happening in Bolivia is that this design that we're discussing about, that we presented on how is structured, the participatory processes design, it's based on the national policy, on the Bolivian river basin management policy. So I think like one of the contributions of this research, which is actually having, I think it can have an impact at the national level, is that we should definitely think about this policy and how it's being implemented and if it's actually helping. The other thing is that the outcomes of this research, I don't think that they're just specific to the Qatari River Basin. I think like we are suggesting within the DPSIR to take into consideration spatial and scalar scales, which is something very useful for planning purposes within IWRM. Also, we are discussing how important is the framing processes and what are the causes of this fragmentation. So we can contribute in a way that these must be taken into consideration in order to develop policies when implemented IWRM. So the scientific contribution of these ideas and these outcomes, I think like it can have an impact in many other contexts. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot to all the jury members for this very nice discussion. I think we still have a little bit of time to receive a few questions from the public. So whoever has a thought, an idea, a question, please be our guest. Yes, please.
And thank you for the question. Not really. We cannot see or find evidence of something is actually being done to manage this relation, but it is true, and there is scientific evidence that shows that the xenobiotic content coming from upstream from the industry and mining, it is within the plants that the communities are using to feed the cattle. And the cattle is used to make dairy products, and they are entering the food chain and the food web of the local communities. So it's an issue that we should take into consideration and reflect about it. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Which DLC? I feel part of the DLC we developed. I think that I think we trust each other. I think that I feel engaged, and I'm actually I see that we can continue the work, and I will be happy to be part of that process. But one more time, I think it's something that it happened through the process of construction. We gained that, we developed that. It's not something that it was kind of imposed in the system, like, okay, you have to be part of this and you have to make it work. It's something that we discuss, and we've been able to manage to make it work, let's say.
Okay, any other questions or remarks? Yes, please.
I definitely think like the connection is important in order to find sustainable outcomes, sustainable solutions. If we don't have that connection among different disciplines and backgrounds, we're just looking at part of the picture. So having this connection, I think it's something definitely very useful. But yeah, I have to admit that it's not easy either. I'm an environmental engineer. I was trained to design and implement drinking and sanitation water systems. And let me tell you a brief story. While I was walking, doing an assessment for a drinking water project in a community in Bolivia, I was walking with community members, and they were showing me around, and we saw a half pipe coming out from the ground and a solar panel. And I was confused because they asked me to go there to make an assessment to build a drinking water system. Like, but you already have one. And the guy told me, no, that was built by UNICEF 5 years ago. It's not working. Like, okay. We didn't have the money to buy for the electricity or to pay the cost of the operation. Like, okay. We were walking in the community and we saw a water tank up in the mountain. It's like, you have a tank. Yeah, a World Vision, another NGO came 3 years ago. They built a gravity-fed system, but the water source, it belongs to another community and we cannot use it anymore. And I was really confused, like I just realized that I can do very sophisticated and nice engineering. But if we don't understand these social and institutional arrangements behind how the water services works, it will not work. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the public? No? Okay, so then I will conclude with one very small last question, just an opinion about, you mentioned that there was a budget about $85 million, but still things doesn't really work out because of the social aspects. But does it also mean that there is no economic drive? I mean, if you have $85 million, some people should at least think, okay, we can make things, but maybe we can make things in a way that it generates money and the local community becomes better. And so this kind of people, do you have them also in this group of stakeholders that give their opinions and try to
No, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, they are part of the racing committee, but I think there are some investments linked to produce, to support economic activities and within the local communities downstream. But one more time, this is not related really to the environmental problem that the Qatari River Basin is facing. So we are actually driving actions to something else that it's not really linked with the main problem, which it's now well documented. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. So the next step is the jury members, they will go and have a discussion among them. I invite you to stay here until the jury members come back and tell you the result of our discussion. The okay. So the jury came to a conclusion, and our secretary, Marijke Huismans, she will give you the results.
Thanks, Afnán. I'm so sorry, we couldn't hear anything right here. Maybe could you repeat, please?
Okay, does the candidate want to say a little word?
Yes. Yeah, no, well, now just want to thank to the juries, the friends and family accompanying this process. It's definitely not an easy process. It's very challenging in different ways. I think we find a strength in different ways as a human, as a person. That I found that strength in my daughter. She's been accompanying me and giving me motivation and strength to continue. And I really want to share that with you. And just want to thank her. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, the promoter.
I take it off and then. Is it your computer? Yeah. Why is the folder not coming up? Okay, so I'm very happy to stand here and just gives a little bit of background on the thesis. And as you can see, it's the first time that we had two authors on the front page of a thesis. So there was Afnán and then also his daughter, Julia. So it was a joint effort somehow. Eh? So anyway, but how does an engineer end up in an engineering faculty and a degree? There's probably a long story behind it. And we go in your childhood. And you can see that Afnán is already playing, well, engineering cars and so on, but also looking at the water. Yes, so he's very attracted. And we can only see, I did research. And the research showed that when you are on a picture, there's also water. There's plenty. I just took 5, but it's a small sample of a big, big number of pictures of Afnán and water. So that's clear. Eh? Afnán is passionate about water. But more interesting is that he's very passionate about the human phase of water. So also he can see that he has been talking to people, looking at water scarcity, drinking water problems. So he really, I think that's what took him from engineering, where he started, environmental engineering, towards a decision after a number of years working as an engineer to go to study water management. And he went to study that at UNESCO IT in Delft. So 2 years you were there. And I think it was not too long after this that the Universidad Católica Boliviana San Pablo decided to, well, started a program with Flanders, the LEAF program, and that there were probably many courts, but one project at the end went focusing on water, and you got spotted and you got on board. And this is, I think, when Afnán got connected with Flanders, with our university and with our department, and where I had the honor to become your promoter on the thesis, which was also for me not an evident topic. And I was also very happy that Nora joined us, and Dr. Steve Eisenreich, who was here, also provided inputs, and that many other colleagues joined forces, and that you had indeed, in that context, you had this transdisciplinary network around you, and Professor Kamps and so on. So we had inputs from many people, and then probably also courts. People are dragging you. Maybe why don't you do some modeling, for instance? That didn't work. So here you can see that you went into the field talking to people and animals, and that you got enrolled at the university, and a collaboration with Flanders started. So off you went to Flanders. So people may have wondered, what were you doing in Flanders? Thinking. It's not relaxing. He was thinking and dreaming of an ideal world, maybe two. And people may think drinking. No. He was exchanging ideas with colleagues, as you can see. So, and exploring the city, and but the most important that you were doing, and we don't have any picture of this, but we have evidence, you were writing, because we got publications. So you really, I think, have been quite successful, not only in publishing papers, but also becoming the interface between the science and policy and the community, because paper and information were picked up by platforms and by the media. And you can see, we were talking to stakeholders. And here you can see how he's like a professional communicator. So I think this is also a very important part of you, where you succeeded in not only bringing the papers, getting this thesis, but also bringing the message towards the community, towards the media, and also within our departments. So I think now everybody is aware that the social component of water is very important. And all of this has been bringing you to a graduation, and you had already a graduation in the family, but I'm now also very proud that also you got a degree. So congratulations, and estoy muy orgullosa de ti.
Thanks so much, and I really appreciate it.
Okay, and now I think.
Okay, thanks to everybody. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to our speaker. Thanks to the jury members. I think we can now conclude this session, and congratulations again.
Dpsir.